the silence of the night, when the modern world recedes into hums of machines and faint lights beyond the window, the earth itself whispers of stories too ancient for memory. Beneath our feet lies a buried library, written in stone, bone, and fire. Every fragment tells of lives that once breathed, of hands that once shaped tools, of voices that rose against the wind before vanishing into the abyss of forgotten ages. We walk upon layers of time, stacked like ash over embers, and yet we rarely pause to ask what secrets lie just beneath the surface. For what if our past is not as neat as the textbooks suggest? What if the ground carries echoes of civilizations long erased, of resets we cannot fathom, of a world older, stranger, and more fragile than we ever believed? Before we embark into that long night of memory, consider journeying with us further. Like, share, and subscribe, not as an interruption, but as a way to keep this flame alive. Each act of support ensures these ancient voices do not vanish into silence again, allowing us to walk deeper into the shadowed corridors of time, together. The plains stretch outward in silence, though silence here is never truly empty. The wind carries its own voice, threading through tall grasses that bend like waves beneath a sky so vast it dwarfs every living thing beneath it. This is the world as it existed in the Pleistocene, when humanity was young, fragile, and scattered, and survival depended not on the certainty of shelter, but on the persistence of pursuit, the tracking of game, and the wisdom of elders who knew how to read the landscape as if it were scripture. The air is sharp with cold, tinged with the scent of damp earth, for glaciers linger to the north, vast walls of ice whose breath chills even lands far beyond their reach. The light itself feels ancient, a pale and watchful presence falling upon hunters and hunted alike. Here, Homo sapiens move with quiet determination. They are not yet numerous, nor secure, but they are alert, each figure sharpened by necessity. The herd ahead is immense, mammoths moving slowly across the grassland, each step pressing deep into the soil. To bring down one of these giants is to bring life to the band, but the risk is grave. Beneath the rhythmic rumble of hooves lies the reminder that the hunter is also vulnerable, that a single misstep could bring death not from hunger, but from tusk and trampling weight. The hunters whisper among themselves, their language still raw but rich with meaning. Gestures, grunts, words carried like sparks across the cold air. Each breath crystallizes, merging with the exhalations of others, as if the band itself were a single great organism, bound by trust, rhythm, and the invisible cord of shared survival. Spears are hefted, fire-hardened tips gleaming faintly in the sun. The chase begins, not with reckless speed, but with patience, for persistence hunting is their gift, their weapon against creatures far stronger than themselves. Hours pass, the men and women driving the herd into panic, isolating the weak, weaving together endurance and strategy until the beast falters. When at last the mammoth falls, struck by stone-tipped spears, the earth itself seems to shudder. Victory is not triumph but relief, a momentary reprieve carved from a world that otherwise offers little mercy. Around the carcass, work begins. Stone blades napped to sharpness by careful hands cut into hide and muscle. The smell of blood mingles with grass and wind, a visceral reminder that survival is not an abstract struggle, but a physical, immediate reality. Children watch with wide eyes, learning not through instruction, but through immersion, for the lessons of life cannot be spoken alone. They must be lived, witnessed, absorbed into muscle memory. The marrow within bones is prized, cracked open with deliberate strikes that echo across the plains. Fire will later transform this meat into sustenance, But for now, it is raw, bloody, and vital. The camp comes alive that night. Flames leap upward, their glow painting the hunters in shifting gold and shadow. The meat roasts, fat sizzling as it drips into the fire. The scent travels outward, carried by the wind, tempting predators that linger just beyond the light. Wolves, their eyes glowing faintly, circle in silence, waiting for opportunity. The people know this dance well. Stones are thrown, firebrands lifted, voices raised to remind the wilderness that these flames are not to be approached. For fire is no longer only warmth or light. It is a barrier, a weapon, a symbol of human dominion carved from fragility. In that circle of flickering light, another kind of survival emerges. Hands trace patterns in the dirt, retelling the hunt. Stories ripple outward, each word adding shape to memory, each gesture embedding knowledge in the young. Here, myth begins, for the hunt is not only survival, but a drama, a tale of courage, danger, and unseen forces that tip the balance of life and death. Shadows thrown against rock and hide flicker like spirits, faces elongating into something otherworldly. In this way, imagination awakens, a force as vital as stone tools or sharpened spears. For to dream is to prepare, to envision possibilities beyond the immediate struggle. When the fire wanes, silence grows heavy once more. The stars emerge, piercingly bright in the untouched night sky. They wheel in constellations no one has yet named, though every eye gazes upward with wonder. Patterns are felt if not yet recorded, connections drawn between movements of the heavens and rhythms of the earth. A child might point to a cluster of stars, asking what they mean, and an elder, unsure, may invent a story that threads meaning where none is certain. From such stories, myth is born, and from myth, memory takes root. What is survival without story? What is existence without a sense of belonging to something larger than the moment's hunger and fear? But survival is never still. At dawn, the camp moves again, for the plains are vast and the herds roam ceaselessly. The people follow the migrations, always chasing sustenance, always seeking shelter in caves or beneath overhanging cliffs when the weather turns against them. Each tool carried is precious, a carefully crafted blade or scraper, the product of skill passed through countless hands. The knowledge of how to strike stone against stone to produce a perfect flake is as vital as breath itself. One careless strike and the tool is ruined, yet in the rhythm of flint knapping lies an artistry, a meditation that binds the maker to both the present and the distant lineage of ancestors who first discovered the spark of possibility hidden within stone. The land itself is alive with challenge. Rivers cut across the plains, their waters swift and cold, carrying fish that dart just beyond reach. Forests edge the grasslands, dense and shadowed, home to predators both seen and unseen. Lions prowl, heavier and more muscular than those of today, their roars vibrating through the night. To step into the trees is to risk ambush, yet it is also to find shelter, berries, and wood for fire. The people live at this boundary, forever negotiating between fear and necessity, courage and caution. In every movement, one sees the fragility of humanity, but also its promise. For these small bands, scattered and vulnerable, carry within them the seeds of all that will follow. Every fire lit, every hunt endured, every story told is a step along a path invisible to them, but inevitable to us. They cannot know that their footprints will harden into fossils, that their painted hands on cave walls will outlast empires, that their bones will one day be unearthed by strangers who gaze upon them with awe. To them, there is only the moment, the cold, the hunger, the relentless push of survival. And yet, within this endless struggle, something profound begins to stir. Around the fire, laughter breaks out, brief, human, defiant against the night. A child's voice sings a crude melody, the rhythm of footsteps, the echo of a hunt. For an instant, the plains do not feel vast or empty, but intimate, alive with meaning. The stars above shimmer, the fire crackles, and the shadows dance. Humanity, fragile though it is, has begun to create not only tools but culture, not only survival, but story. The plains are no longer only a stage for survival. They are the canvas upon which the first brushstrokes of identity are painted. The night grows colder, the fire burns lower, and the wolves retreat at last into the darkness. Yet within the circle of flame, the people dream. They dream of herds yet to be found, of hunts yet to come, of mysteries etched in stars that no one can yet name. They do not know it, but they are already building a bridge into the unknown, one spark at a time. The world shifts quietly around them. Ice grinds at the edges of the continent, rivers carve new channels, and in distant caves, others of their kind etch animals onto stone walls, leaving behind silent prayers of pigment and shape. The earth is vast, and the people are few, yet the bond between land and life is unbreakable. In these shadows on the plains, the first foundations are being laid, not of stone cities or written words, but of something deeper, something that will one day echo across millennia. The plains will remember, and the fires lit here will cast their glow long into the gathering night. Darkness was once the greatest predator. When the sun sank beyond the horizon and the warmth of day bled away, shadows swallowed the land in a silence that was not peace, but menace. For the night was alive, alive with movement, with eyes gleaming in the distance, with the prowling hunger of creatures whose senses outmatched the fragile humans huddled together. Yet in this abyss of uncertainty, one element turned vulnerability into power: fire. Born from lightning strikes, from the friction of stone against stone, from embers carried carefully in bundles of bark, fire was more than flame. It was defiance, a declaration that fragile beings of flesh and bone could carve out a circle of light against the void. Around the flames, the world shifted. Cold winds were driven back, predators held at bay by the strange living glow. But fire was more than safety. It was transformation. Meat that once spoiled quickly or carried sickness could be seared and made safer, its richness unlocked in smoke and fat. Roots, hard and bitter in their raw state, softened when heated, releasing new nourishment. Ashes hardened clay, reshaping the possibilities of tools and vessels. Every flicker was a lesson, every spark a discovery. The mastery of fire was no single moment, but a long inheritance, handed down like a secret, guarded as one guards life itself. Yet fire also shaped imagination. In its light, shadows leapt upon rock walls, elongating figures into towering forms, twisting faces into masks of gods and beasts. Children stared wide-eyed at the patterns, seeing more than flickering chance. They saw spirits, shapes, whispers from a world beyond. The elders, with slow voices and patient gestures, wove tales around these illusions. A flame became the breath of a great spirit. The curling smoke became the path between this world and another. Here, in the fragile safety of light, myth was born. Consider the caves deep within Europe, sealed in silence for tens of thousands of years, until rediscovered by modern eyes. Their walls, covered with horses, aurochs, lions, and mammoths, are not mere decoration. They are echoes of nights like these, when hunters painted what they feared, revered, and sought to understand. The red ochre, the black charcoal, the delicate engravings, all speak of a mind that had moved beyond survival alone. To create an image of a beast upon the wall was to capture its essence, to hold its spirit, perhaps even to ensure success in hunts yet to come. These painted chambers were sanctuaries, temples lit by fire's glow, where shadows and pigment conspired to create a world beyond the immediate. The flickering circle of fire also gave rise to something else: storytelling. Words alone were not enough. Gestures, tones, and the rhythm of flame combined to imprint memory upon the young. A hunter might recount the chase of a great aurochs, his voice low, his arms sweeping to mimic the beast's horns. A woman might sing of the rivers, of their floods and gifts, her melody rising like the crackle of firewood. Children learned not only what was, but what might be, absorbing through story the wisdom of generations. Fire became a stage, and each night a performance of survival and imagination intertwined. But fire was also danger. It could leap from control, devouring grass and forest alike, transforming safety into ruin. Whole landscapes could be scarred by the very element that sustained life. This paradox was not lost on those early bands. To control fire was to hold power, but to respect it was to survive. Flames were fed carefully, guarded against wind and rain, nurtured as though alive. Embers were carried between campsites, wrapped in bark or moss, glowing hearts that would be coaxed back to flame with each new stop along the endless migration. Night after night, the circle of fire became the cradle of culture. Music arose here, with sticks struck upon hollow logs, with bones fashioned into flutes that sang in eerie tones beneath the stars. Dance followed, bodies swaying and stamping in rhythm, shadows swirling in great spirals across stone and earth. These were not entertainments in the modern sense, but invocations, movements and sounds that bound the group together, that connected them to forces larger than themselves. A rhythm shared by many feet could dissolve the boundary between individual and tribe, turning scattered lives into a single heartbeat. And always, the darkness pressed close. Wolves prowled at the edges, their eyes reflecting sparks of orange. Lions, too, larger than their modern descendants, crept silently beyond sight, their roars echoing across the night. To those huddled around the flames, the beasts were not mere animals, but spirits, adversaries, rivals. It is easy to see how gods of tooth and claw might have taken shape in the human mind. The night was filled with presences that were not seen but felt, and fire alone drew the line between them and us. The cycle repeated endlessly: day for survival, night for story. Hunts and foraging gave way to fire-lit rituals. Time was measured not in hours, but in the rhythm of flame. Embers glowing low, sparks drifting upward like lost souls, flames rising again with new wood. Generations passed in these circles, knowledge carried forward like the ember bundles themselves. To forget fire was to perish. To lose the stories was to lose meaning. Both were guarded fiercely, as though they were one and the same. It is here, in these gatherings, that humanity became more than animal. Fire forged not only tools and meals, but memory and myth. It was the first cathedral, its flames the altar, its smoke the prayer. Around it, bonds were sealed, disputes resolved, love confessed, and death mourned. Around it, the dead were remembered, their names carried into the smoke, as though the flames could deliver them to the other side. Fire gave humanity its first sense of eternity, its first fragile bridge between the world of the living and the mysteries that lay beyond. And yet, even as these rituals deepened, change was stirring. The glaciers that had long defined the Pleistocene world began to retreat, the climate shifting toward new patterns. Rivers swelled with meltwater, forests pressed further into plains, and game moved unpredictably. The hunters who had once followed mammoths and bison across open steppe now found themselves hemmed by woods and swamps. The old rhythms were breaking, forcing adaptation, forcing memory to grow longer, stories to grow richer, strategies to evolve. The fire still burned, but now its circle flickered against a changing backdrop. One night, perhaps, a group huddled as rain fell beyond the cave mouth, the fire hissing but holding strong. They listened not only to stories of the hunt, but to speculation about the future. What would happen when the herds dwindled? What if the rivers shifted? What if the cold returned? In such questions lay the first stirrings of foresight, of planning that extended beyond the immediate. Around the fire, imagination leapt not only backward to myth, but forward to possibility. It was here, in flame and shadow, that humanity began to shape its destiny, not just to survive the night, but to dream of mornings yet to come. The gathering night was never merely darkness. It was a crucible where fear and courage, story and memory, hunger and imagination converged. Fire was the center, but it was humanity's awakening mind that turned sparks into symbols, flames into myth, and shadows into meaning. The night was no longer simply endured. It was transformed into a canvas upon which the first lines of culture, spirituality, and wonder were drawn. And when dawn came, when the fire dwindled to ashes and smoke drifted upward into the pale sky, the people rose and moved again. Yet they carried the memory of the flames within them, just as surely as they carried embers to ignite the next night's blaze. Fire had become part of them, inseparable, eternal, a companion of flesh and thought alike. Beyond the horizon, change awaited. The glaciers would continue to retreat, rivers would swell and recede, forests would spread their canopies. With them, humanity too would change, no longer bound solely to the endless chase, but beginning to pause, to root, to build. The firelight that once served as the only hearth would one day be joined by walls, fields, and permanent hearthstones. But that story belongs to another dawn, another chapter, where the embers of night give way to the first settlements. The ashes of countless fires scattered across the plains eventually marked not only movement, but the beginning of pause. For tens of thousands of years, humanity had been shaped by the chase, by the endless following of herds, by the restless rhythm of survival that demanded constant migration. But as the ice sheets retreated, rivers swelled, and the climate shifted into the gentler cadence of the Holocene, a new possibility stirred in the human imagination. The land itself offered a different kind of promise: stability. Seeds dropped into soil could yield food, animals could be tamed rather than hunted, shelters could endure beyond a single night. The first settlements were born not in triumph, but in hesitation. Tentative roots sunk into earth that had long resisted permanence. Imagine the landscape then, where once the horizon had been dominated by the open expanse of steppe. Forests now pressed outward, their canopies thick with leaves and their undergrowth alive with small game. Rivers, swollen with meltwater, cut broad valleys that shimmered with fish. The great herds began to thin, some species vanishing altogether, others retreating into narrower ranges. Mammoths, once the giants of the plains, grew fewer until their shadows no longer darkened the horizon. The old patterns could not be followed. Humanity faced a choice: And in that choice, everything changed. At first, the settlements were little more than clusters of huts, wattle and daub walls, thatched roofs, stones arranged in circles. Fires burned not in open camps, but in hearths that held the heat through the night. Here, families gathered not to prepare for the next march, but to return, night after night, to the same doorway, the same patch of earth. The soil itself became a partner in survival. Wild grasses that had long been gathered were now sown deliberately, their grains tended with a new kind of patience. Each stalk harvested meant more than a single meal. It was an investment in the future, a promise that life could be built layer by layer upon the same ground. But permanence came at a cost. To plant meant to wait, and to wait meant to be vulnerable. Storms could flatten fields, pests could devour crops, floods could erase months of labor. Unlike the hunt, where risk and reward played out in the span of hours, farming required faith. Faith in the earth, in the sky, in the fragile bargain between human hands and forces far beyond control. To live in one place was to gamble that the world would not betray you. And in that gamble lay both hope and anxiety. The settlements grew, not as isolated shelters, but as communities woven together by shared labor. Fields were cleared, irrigation ditches carved, animals penned. The first domesticated dogs curled beside hearths, guardians of the threshold. Goats and sheep, once wild, were tethered and bred, their milk and wool adding new layers to the diet and the fabric of life. Pottery emerged, shaped from clay and hardened by fire, vessels that could store grain, water, and oil. With storage came surplus, and with surplus came the first whispers of inequality. Some families holding more, others less, the seeds of future hierarchies sown as surely as the barley in the fields. Archaeologists uncover these beginnings in places like Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, where mud brick houses pressed wall against wall in a honeycomb of human habitation. There, the dead were buried beneath the floors of the living, their bones sealed beneath plaster as though to bind generations together in a single continuity. On the walls of these homes, paintings of bulls and hunters remind us that the old world of the chase was never entirely forgotten. The first cities, though small, were layered with memory, myth, and mystery, each hearth a link in a chain stretching back into the unbroken night of prehistory. But settlement did more than feed and shelter. It changed time itself. No longer was life measured only by the rise and fall of the sun, the migrations of animals, or the shifting of seasons across distant plains. Now it was marked by planting and harvest, by cycles of growth and decay bound to the same soil. Calendars took root in observation, the tracking of stars and solstices now tied not only to wonder, but to survival. To miss the right moment for planting was to risk famine. The sky became a clock, the land a ledger, and humanity its careful steward. Yet even in these early settlements, fragility remained close. Disease spread more easily where people and animals crowded together. Crops could fail, wells could dry, strangers could arrive at the edge of the fields seeking what they did not have. Permanence demanded defense, and so walls rose, ditches deepened, and weapons sharpened, not only for the hunt, but for the protection of harvests. With stability came conflict, for what could be built could also be taken. And still, the heart of settlement was not only labor, but ritual. To live with the soil was to depend upon mysteries larger than the hand could shape. Rain, sun, fertility, and death became not only natural processes but sacred powers, worshipped, placated, and feared. Shrines appeared within homes, small altars adorned with figurines, perhaps the first household gods. Across the fields, larger temples rose, their stones aligned with sunrises and star paths, their altars stained with offerings meant to secure the favor of unseen forces. In this way, settlement did not diminish myth, it deepened it, tying the mysteries of the cosmos to the soil beneath one's feet. The daily life of these early villagers was simple, but relentless. At dawn, the grinding of grain filled the air, stone against stone producing flour from harvested stalks. Smoke curled from hearths as bread was baked, its scent drifting through narrow lanes. Children fetched water from nearby streams, their laughter mingling with the bleating of penned animals. Women tended fields, men repaired walls, though such divisions were never absolute. Life was communal, bound together by necessity, each task a thread in the fabric of survival. Yet beneath this rhythm lay the pulse of change. Humanity had crossed a threshold it could never fully retreat from. For in settlement lay memory of a new kind. Stories no longer drifted from place to place, but were anchored to specific stones, fields, and graves. Ancestors were buried in the soil where the living still walked, binding generations into an unbroken chain. To abandon the village was to abandon not only the present, but the dead themselves. Permanence was no longer just practical, it was spiritual. Place had become identity, and identity had become inseparable from earth. Still, questions lingered. Was this truly progress? Some scholars today argue that the agricultural revolution brought as much suffering as it did prosperity, that bones from these early farmers show signs of malnutrition, that their lives were harder, their diets narrower than those of their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Yet even if life grew more fragile in body, it grew deeper in story. The village was not merely a survival strategy, it was a seed of civilization itself. To pause, to build, to return. That was the beginning of history as we now recognize it. At night, fires still burned, but their glow fell against walls that would stand beyond a single season. Shadows danced not only on cave walls, but across plastered surfaces adorned with painted bulls, birds, and hunters. The stories told here were no longer only of the chase, but of the fields, of rain, of ancestors who watched from beneath the floor. Time itself had thickened, becoming layered with past, present, and future. And so, as dawn broke over the first settlements, humanity looked outward from walls and fields into a world forever changed. No longer wanderers upon the endless plains, they had tethered themselves to soil, to seasons, to cycles of growth and decay. They had begun to build not just homes but memory, not just harvests but history. Yet beneath the stability lay a whisper of unease. For permanence, though it offered roots, also demanded responsibility, and responsibility could become burden. The world beyond the walls still pulsed with mystery, other tribes, other lands, ruins half buried beneath dust. The question lingered, silent but insistent. Were these small villages the end of a journey, or merely the threshold to something larger, more complex, more perilous? The answer lay hidden beneath layers of soil and time, in cities waiting to be uncovered, in civilizations that would rise and vanish. The hearth had given way to the household, but beyond the horizon, entire worlds were already stirring in shadow, waiting to leave their mark upon history. The village was only the beginning. From its narrow lanes and clustered hearths emerged the impulse to build larger, to gather more souls within walls, to reach for permanence, not just in households but in communities that pulsed like living organisms. Where rivers flowed wide and fertile, where trade paths converged, the first cities stirred into being. They rose not with the suddenness of invention, but with the slow layering of generations, each stone stacked upon another, each fire built atop the ashes of its predecessor. And yet, even as they flourished, time waited with patience. For just as easily as they rose, so too could they be buried, abandoned, or consumed, leaving only ruins sealed beneath the dust. Imagine the city of Çatalhöyük around 7000 BCE, a honeycomb of mud brick houses pressed so tightly together that no streets ran between them. People entered their homes through roof holes, climbing down ladders into rooms whose walls bore paintings of leopards, vultures, and horned bulls. Beneath the plastered floors lay the bones of ancestors, interred where the living continue to walk. Each household was a microcosm of life and death, memory sealed into the walls, myth painted in ochre across plaster. Yet for all its complexity, Çatalhöyük eventually fell silent, its bricks dissolving back into the soil, its stories forgotten until spades uncovered them once more. Nor was Çatalhöyük alone. Along the banks of rivers that would later cradle great empires, smaller cities flickered briefly into life. In Mesopotamia, settlements along the Tigris and Euphrates began to gather shape, huts swelling into temples, clay tablets pressed with the first cuneiform marks, trade routes bringing obsidian, copper, and shells from far-off lands. To live in these early cities was to live in a place both sacred and precarious. The river gave life, but it could also flood and destroy. The city provided safety in numbers, but it also demanded order, hierarchy, and labor. For every wall built was a wall that had to be defended. Every temple raised was a weight upon the shoulders of those who farmed and carried stone. Yet what fascinates most are not only the cities remembered, but those that disappeared. Beneath shifting sands, in lands that today seem barren, archaeologists unearth fragments of streets, plazas, and workshops. At times, it is a single stone foundation. At times, an entire complex buried under centuries of soil. Each discovery carries with it the same unspoken question: how many others lie still hidden, their stories sealed in darkness? There is Göbekli Tepe, on a hill in southeastern Anatolia, a site older than Çatalhöyük, older even than agriculture itself. There, massive stone pillars were raised and carved with animals, snakes, boars, vultures, lions, in a circle of ritual whose meaning remains elusive. This was no village shrine, but a monumental effort, requiring organization, labor, and vision. Yet after centuries of use, the site was deliberately buried, entombed beneath earth as though hidden from future eyes. What impulse drove these people, hunter-gatherers on the cusp of farming, to carve such massive stones, to create a place of worship or gathering so far beyond their immediate needs? And why did they seal it away? Such riddles lie at the heart of these buried cities, tantalizing glimpses of a human story not yet fully told. Other ruins speak in whispers across the deserts. In the Indus Valley, cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa rose with straight streets, drainage systems, and granaries, only to fade into silence long before history recorded their names. The baked bricks of their walls, still bearing fingerprints of their makers, lie beneath layers of dust and time. In the Americas, cities of stone and earthworks emerged in the Mississippi Valley, only to be abandoned before Europeans ever set foot upon the land. Time buries, wind erodes, rivers change course, and with each shift, entire worlds vanish. The earth itself conspires to hide memory. Sandstorms sweep across once fertile plains, leaving dunes where fields once spread green. Earthquakes topple walls into rubble. Floods deposit silt that seals entire villages beneath fertile new soil. Centuries later, farmers plow their fields unaware that beneath their feet lie streets, temples, and bones. In the silence of the ground, the cities sleep, waiting for rediscovery. And when rediscovered, they speak with a voice both haunting and incomplete. A broken jar, a figurine with staring eyes, a doorway leading nowhere. These fragments hint at lives lived, loves shared, rituals performed. Yet the greater story is gone, swallowed with the people who once filled these spaces. The archaeologist brushes away dust and reveals structure, but the laughter, the quarrels, the prayers have vanished. Each city beneath the dust is both presence and absence, evidence and silence. What strikes us most is how fragile permanence proves to be. Humanity sought to root itself, to build beyond the fleeting seasons, and yet every attempt was shadowed by collapse. A drought lasting a generation could empty a city. An invading tribe could raze it. An epidemic could hollow it from within. The ruins that remain remind us that the idea of permanence is an illusion, that the soil is always waiting to reclaim what is built upon it. And yet, each collapse is also a seed for memory, for myth, for the stories of lost cities that haunt human imagination. Perhaps it is no accident that nearly every culture speaks of vanished places, from Atlantis to lost kingdoms swallowed by desert or sea. These myths may be echoes of real cities erased by time, filtered through memory until fact became legend. Plato's tale of Atlantis, though almost certainly allegory, may echo the collective memory of coastal floods at the end of the last ice age. Likewise, the flood stories from Mesopotamia, echoed in distant lands, may preserve faint recollections of drowned settlements long forgotten. Cities beneath the dust remind us of the twin nature of human ambition, to create and to forget. We build in stone, believing it eternal, yet even stone crumbles. We raise monuments, believing they will outlast us, yet the desert swallows them as surely as the sea. Still, we build again, compelled by the same impulse that drove those at Göbekli Tepe to carve their pillars, that drove the people of the Indus Valley to align their streets. In every generation the dust waits, but so too does the human will to defy it. When we walk through these ruins today, brushing against stones worn smooth by hands long vanished, there is a sense not only of distance, but of kinship. Their hopes were our hopes, their fears our fears. They too sought safety, meaning memory. They too dreamed that their creations would endure. And though their walls now lie broken, their dreams linger in us. For we too build cities, we too raise monuments, and we too whisper stories of permanence in a world that grants none. The dust covers, but it also preserves. It seals away fragments that return to us like voices from a deep well, faint but undeniable. Every uncovered ruin is a reminder that beneath the soil lie entire chapters of humanity's story still unread. How many more Göbekli Tepes sleep in silence? How many cities were lost not because they were never built, but because time has not yet returned them to us? The cities beneath the dust invite humility. They tell us that permanence is not guaranteed, that even the mightiest constructions fall silent, but they also reveal the resilience of memory. For though the cities vanished, humanity endured, carrying forward the impulse to build, to gather, to create meaning in stone and story. As the dust settled over forgotten streets, other voices began to rise. Myths of floods, tales of vanished lands, whispers of worlds undone spread across generations. The ruins themselves faded, but the memory of loss did not. And so, in myth as in stone, the buried cities lived on. Beyond the horizon, new cities would rise, larger, more ambitious, yet equally vulnerable. But before we reach them, we must pause upon the threshold of memory and myth, where floods swept across continents, where waters rose and swallowed what once stood proud. For the dust does not only bury, it also conceals the scars of waters that once remade the earth. And in those waters lie the echoes of stories told across the world, of floods, of forgotten civilizations, of worlds that vanished into the sea. There are few myths as universal as the flood. Across continents, in cultures separated by oceans and millennia, stories of waters rising to swallow the world recur with uncanny persistence. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets tell of Utnapishtim, who survived a deluge sent by gods angered at the noise of humanity. In the Hebrew scriptures, Noah builds an ark to preserve life through 40 days of rain. In India, the tale of Manu describes a god who warns of an oncoming flood and guides humanity to safety. In Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh speaks of waters washing away the first people, leaving only silence in their wake. From the Pacific Islands to the icy north, from the heart of Africa to the Andean highlands, the refrain is the same. The waters came, and the world was undone. For centuries, scholars dismissed these stories as metaphor, moral allegory, or coincidence. Yet the consistency unsettles us. Why should so many disparate peoples, unconnected by geography, conjure the same image of cataclysm by water? The answer may lie not in imagination alone, but in memory, carried across generations like an ember, retold until fact blurred into myth. The end of the last ice age brought rising seas of staggering scale. As glaciers melted, oceans surged upward, drowning coastlines, swallowing plains, and forcing humanity into retreat. Lands that had been home for thousands of years vanished beneath waves. For those who lived through it, or inherited the stories of those who did, it must have felt like the end of the world. Consider Doggerland, the fertile land that once stretched between Britain and continental Europe. 10,000 years ago, it was not sea, but marsh, river, and meadow, home to hunters who tracked deer and aurochs across its expanse. Then the waters rose, slowly at first, then with sudden violence as meltwater pulses surged from collapsing glaciers. One day the horizon stretched with forests. The next, the sea lapped at villages, erasing them grain by grain. Today, fishermen in the North Sea still dredge bones and tools from its depths, fragments of a world that now lies drowned. To the descendants of those who fled, what tale could better capture the loss than that of a flood sent by powers beyond comprehension? Or look to the Black Sea, once a freshwater lake. Around 5600 BCE, rising Mediterranean waters surged through the Bosporus, transforming it into the sea we know today. The deluge was immense, flooding lands where people had lived, hunted, and farmed. Villages disappeared overnight, their hearths extinguished, their fields swallowed. Is it coincidence that the Mesopotamian flood myths emerged in this same span of time? Or are they the echoes of refugees, their stories traveling outward, reshaped into epics of divine wrath and salvation? Every drowned world leaves behind questions. Beneath the waters of Japan's coast, stone terraces lie at Yonaguni, some swearing they are remnants of a forgotten city, others insisting they are natural formations. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, divers have found walls and streets beneath the surf, debated as evidence of ancient settlements swallowed by sea. In the Gulf of Cambay, sonar surveys have revealed structures now buried beneath silt, perhaps the remains of civilizations that thrived before the floodwaters advanced. Each discovery fuels speculation. How much of human history lies drowned, erased not by conquest or decay, but by the relentless patience of water. Yet floods were not always punishment or tragedy. In myth, they are also renewal, a washing clean of corruption, a second chance offered to survivors. To live in the Neolithic world was to be bound to rivers that gave both life and destruction. The Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Indus, all were generous and cruel, flooding their banks to bring fertile silt, but also to erase homes and fields. People learned to see water as dual, both gift and peril, both womb and grave. Myths of floods may have been less prophecy than memory, less allegory than acknowledgement, that to build upon the earth is always to build in the shadow of water. But the universality of the flood story leaves a deeper, more unsettling possibility. Perhaps these myths are not simply recollections of regional catastrophes, but fragments of a collective trauma stretching back to the Younger Dryas. Around 12,800 years ago, the earth lurched into sudden cold, glaciers surged once more, and then, just as suddenly, warmth returned. In that violent transition, seas rose, climates shifted, and vast tracts of land disappeared. Some scientists suggest a comet or asteroid strike as catalyst. Others point to complex shifts in ocean currents. Whatever the cause, the effect was apocalyptic. Humanity, already fragile, endured upheaval on a planetary scale. Could it be that flood myths are cultural fossils, the surviving memory of an event so cataclysmic it imprinted itself upon the species itself? From this vantage, Plato's tale of Atlantis reads differently. Written in the 4th century BCE, it describes an island of great power and technology, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. Scholars have long dismissed it as allegory, a philosophical warning against hubris. Yet its resonance endures. Why? Perhaps because it feels like memory, not invention. Not memory of one place, but of many. Doggerland, the Black Sea, countless drowned coasts, each refracted through story until they converged into one symbol of a lost world. Atlantis, whether real or imagined, embodies the ache of forgetting, the knowledge that what was once thriving can vanish utterly, leaving only silence beneath the waves. To stand at a shoreline today is to look upon a graveyard hidden from sight. Beneath the waters lie villages, forests, hunting grounds, and temples that once thrummed with life. We walk beaches unaware that our ancestors once walked miles further out, where now fish swim and tides churn. The sea has no monuments. It buries its dead in silence. And yet, across myth and memory, the voices of the forgotten rise, whispering of floods that came without mercy, of homes surrendered to depths that could not be fought. The flood stories remind us that humanity has always lived at the mercy of forces larger than itself. We build cities, we raise monuments, but the waters rise regardless. And when they do, all that remains are stories carried in breath and ink, preserved in songs and scriptures, retold until their origins blur. Each myth is both warning and elegy, a way of remembering what we cannot retrieve. Yet, there is also resilience. In every flood story, survivors remain. Utnapishtim builds a vessel, Noah an ark, Manu a boat. Always there is someone who endures, who carries forward seeds, animals, stories. The flood destroys, but it also preserves by forcing renewal. This is the paradox of the flood myth. It is a story of annihilation, but also of survival, of continuity carved through catastrophe. Perhaps this is why it persists, why it still resonates across cultures. For we too live in an age of rising waters, watching coastlines erode, glaciers retreat, seas creep higher. The flood myth is not only about the past, it is prophecy, a mirror held up to every generation that dares believe its city's permanent. The forgotten civilizations that drowned remind us of our own fragility. Their ruins lie beneath sediment, waiting to be uncovered or forever sealed. Their names are lost, their songs unremembered, but their fate endures in story. And perhaps that is the truest form of immortality, not the survival of bricks or bones, but the persistence of memory and myth. From the flood, we move into an even deeper enigma, the broken ages of humanity, the sudden silences in the archaeological record, the gaps where flourishing cultures vanish without explanation. If the flood myths remind us of nature's power to erase, the forgotten ages hint at something more mysterious, the possibility that entire chapters of our story have been torn away, leaving only questions in their place. If floods whisper of nature's power to erase, then the broken ages remind us of time's cruel tendency to forget. The human story, traced in bones, stones, and ruins, is not a smooth arc of progress but a tapestry filled with tears and missing threads. Between the peaks of flourishing societies lie valleys of silence, gaps where voices vanish, cities crumble, and knowledge dissolves into the soil. Archaeologists uncover fragments, potsherds, toppled walls, tools left half-finished, but the living world that gave them meaning is gone. What remains are questions, and in those questions, a haunting sense that our history is far less complete than we dare admit. One of the most striking mysteries lies in the fall of the great Neolithic cultures of Europe. Across the continent, long before Rome or Athens, people raised megaliths, great standing stones aligned with solstices, burial chambers built with astonishing precision, monuments that drew entire communities into acts of shared labor. From the Passage, tombs of Newgrange in Ireland, to the stone avenues of Karnak in France, these structures testify to societies organized, skilled, and deeply attuned to the cycles of sun and stars. And yet, around 2500 BCE, many of these cultures faded. Populations declined, traditions broke, monuments were abandoned. Was it climate change, disease, or the arrival of new peoples with bronze weapons? Or was it something subtler, a collapse of belief systems, a loss of meaning that unraveled the fabric of society? Similar questions haunt the ruins of the Indus Valley. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, with their sophisticated grids, drainage systems, and trade networks, flourished for centuries. Then, around 1900 BCE, they withered. The streets grew empty, the wells dried, the once bustling markets fell silent. No great war destroyed them. No single disaster explains their fall. Instead, the civilization dissolved like mist, leaving behind bricks and mysteries. Their script remains undeciphered, their gods unnamed, their voices lost. We know they lived, thrived, and vanished, but we do not know why. Elsewhere, the pattern repeats. The Olmec in Mesoamerica carved colossal heads of stone, their gaze stern and eternal, only for their culture to fragment into shadow. The Minoans on Crete built palaces filled with frescoes and labyrinthine corridors, then succumbed to fire and quake, their myths living on only in Greek echoes of Minos and the Minotaur. In each case, the story is incomplete, the record interrupted. The broken ages remind us that civilizations, no matter how advanced or vibrant, exist on fragile ground. What unsettles most is not just what we know has been lost, but what we suspect may be missing altogether. Archaeology is an uneven record. Soil and time preserve selectively, erasing entire peoples without leaving trace. How many cultures bloomed briefly, never building in stone, never leaving inscriptions, their memory buried with them? How many worlds were lost to flood, fire, drought, or disease, leaving no ruins? only faint echoes in myth. If Göbekli Tepe could lie hidden for thousands of years until modern eyes unearthed it, how many other sacred sites still sleep beneath hills and forests, mistaken for natural rises or forgotten earthworks? These silences open the door to speculation. Some propose that humanity may have risen to greater heights in ages long before recorded history, only to fall back into obscurity. They point to enigmatic structures, such as the pyramids of Giza or the massive blocks of Baalbek, asking whether the societies we know were truly their first builders or inheritors of older knowledge. Mainstream archaeology insists these wonders can be explained by the skill and labor of their time, and yet the questions linger, not always for lack of evidence, but for the allure of mystery itself. What if entire ages of advancement have been erased, their traces scattered by floods, earthquakes, or the grinding patience of ice? Even within accepted history, the gaps are stark. Consider the so-called Dark Ages after the fall of Rome. For centuries, the libraries of Europe lay in ruins, roads crumbled, and knowledge that had once been commonplace dissolved into legend. To later generations, it seemed as though light itself had been extinguished, only to be rekindled by rediscovery. If such collapse could occur in times so recent, how many deeper collapses may have scarred prehistory, vanishing beyond all recovery? These broken ages do not speak only of loss, they also whisper of resilience. Humanity endures even when civilizations fall. Survivors carry fragments forward, songs, tools, seeds, myths. A collapsed city may vanish, but its memory may live on in stories of golden ages, of gods and heroes, of vanished kingdoms. The line between myth and memory blurs, leaving us to wonder whether legends of Lemuria, Mu, or Atlantis are fanciful invention or distorted recollections of real cultures long erased. To dismiss them outright is to risk underestimating the endurance of memory across generations. To accept them as literal is to mistake shadow for substance. Between lies the fertile ground of mystery. The broken ages also carry a sobering lesson. Civilizations collapse not only from forces beyond their control, but from within. Soil exhausted by overfarming, forests cut faster than they regrow, hierarchies that strain under inequality, all contribute to fragility. To see abandoned fields and toppled palaces is to see warnings written in ruins, warnings about the price of hubris, about the peril of believing permanence is assured. These ancient silences are mirrors in which we glimpse our own vulnerabilities, reminders that what has been lost before can be lost again. Yet the allure of the broken ages is not only in their warnings, but in their invitation. They beckon us to imagine, to reconstruct, to fill the gaps with story. When we walk among fallen stones, when we gaze upon artifacts with no context, we are not only archaeologists, but dreamers, piecing together worlds from fragments. In this way, the broken ages are not voids, but canvases, spaces where imagination meets evidence, where history and myth converge. The silence of these vanished cultures resonates like an echo in a cavern, empty yet alive with possibility. Each uncovered shard, each unearthed ruin, each undeciphered symbol is a voice calling from that silence, reminding us that history is never complete, that memory is always fragile. The broken ages remind us that the story of humanity is not linear but cyclical, a rhythm of rise and fall, of building and forgetting. As we sift through these gaps, we stand at a threshold. Beyond the silence of the broken ages lies another mystery, the way humanity turned its gaze upward to the stars, aligning monuments and myths with the heavens. If the flood myths tie us to water and the broken ages bind us to soil, then the cosmic watchers remind us that we have always sought meaning in the sky, that even in collapse humanity kept its eyes upon the eternal. When the earth grew uncertain, when floods rose or cities crumbled, humanity lifted its gaze to the sky. There, above the shifting soil and treacherous waters, was something that seemed eternal. The stars did not drown, the sun did not abandon its rising, the moon waxed and waned in rhythm as steady as breath. To live beneath the night sky was to live beneath a map both mysterious and familiar. A vast canopy of lights whose movements could be trusted even when the world below faltered. From the earliest settlements onward, the heavens became more than backdrop. They became guides, calendars, and gods. The first watchers were not astronomers as we think of them today, but shepherds, farmers, hunters, and storytellers. Around fires, they noticed the way stars shifted across seasons, how constellations marked the passage of time. The rising of the Pleiades might signal the coming of winter. The reappearance of Orion might herald the hunt. The heavens were woven into survival, a cosmic clock that measured planting, migration, and ritual. But the sky was not only practical, it was sacred. To gaze upward was to glimpse eternity, to touch a mystery no flood or famine could erase. Stone monuments testify to this ancient dialogue. At Newgrange in Ireland, a great passage tomb more than 5,000 years old, the rising sun on the winter solstice illuminates the inner chamber with a shaft of light, as though piercing darkness with hope. At Stonehenge, massive stones stand aligned with solstices and lunar cycles, their builders engineering sightlines to celestial events. Across the Atlantic, the great kivas of Chaco Canyon bear markers for solstice and equinox, while the pyramids of Egypt rise like stairways to the stars, their shafts aligned to Orion's belt and the circumpolar stars. These alignments were not accident. They reveal societies that saw in the heavens not chaos but order, a divine pattern worth monumental effort to mirror upon earth. Why such obsession with the sky? Perhaps because it offered permanence in a world of collapse. Civilizations may falter, floods may erase villages, but the stars return. They become anchors for meaning, a cosmic scaffolding on which to hang myth and memory. The sun was a god that rose unfailingly, the moon a goddess of cycles, the planets wandering spirits whose movements foretold destiny. To watch the sky was to read the language of eternity, to believe that the same order above might be invoked to preserve order below. Even in the most ancient myths, the heavens are alive with beings. The Egyptians saw in Orion the god Osiris, forever reborn. The Babylonians inscribed constellations on clay, weaving them into omens that foretold kings' fates. In Mesoamerica, the Maya mapped Venus with astonishing precision, tying its appearances to war and ritual sacrifice. These cultures did not simply observe, they conversed. To them, the stars were not distant suns but presences, watchers, judges, companions. And if the stars were gods, then aligning temples and tombs to their movements was not only architecture but prayer. The cosmic watchers were not only gods of the sky, but those among humanity who watched them. Priests, shamans, and astronomers held power by reading patterns invisible to others. In Mesopotamia, astrologers tracked eclipses and planetary conjunctions, believing they reflected divine will. In Egypt, priestly observers timed festivals and harvests by the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star whose return coincided with the Nile's flood. In the Andes, priest kings gazed from mountaintop observatories, weaving calendars from the sun's shadow. To watch the sky was to hold knowledge, and knowledge was power. Yet there is mystery here too. How did ancient peoples, without telescopes or modern instruments, achieve such precision? At Nabta Playa in the Sahara, stone circles aligned with solstices date back 7,000 years. At Teotihuacan in Mexico, the Avenue of the Dead aligns with the setting of the Pleiades. At Giza, the pyramid's orientation to cardinal points is almost flawless. Some argue that such feats required more than observation, perhaps knowledge inherited from cultures now lost. Mainstream archaeology insists these alignments could be achieved through patient watching, but the possibility of forgotten traditions lingers. Did the Broken Ages carry with them fragments of cosmic knowledge now half remembered in myth? Legends often speak of sky beings, gods descending, messengers arriving, wisdom brought from above. To some, these are metaphors for the stars themselves, personified into divine actors. To others, they hint at something more enigmatic, encounters with forces humanity could not explain, reframed as celestial beings. The Dogon people of Mali, for example, long told stories of Sirius and its invisible companion star, a fact later confirmed by modern astronomy. Whether coincidence, mythic embellishment, or remnant of forgotten knowledge, such tales deepen the mystery of humanity's long gaze upward. The heavens also shaped our sense of destiny. If the stars were eternal, then perhaps our lives too were written among them. Astrology emerged not as superstition, but as the attempt to link human fate with cosmic order, to see in the sky the pattern of our own existence. Kings sought their fortunes in conjunctions, peasants in eclipses, empires in comets. The belief persists even now, a lingering echo of the ancient conviction that we are bound not only to Earth, but to the rhythm of stars. But the watchers also knew fear. The sky could darken in eclipse, turning day to night. Comets blazed suddenly, their tails like swords. Meteors streaked in fire, as though gods hurled stones from heaven. These events were omens, portents of disaster, reminders that the heavens were not always serene but capable of upheaval. Perhaps this is why so many myths describe battles among the stars, wars of gods mirrored in the rise and fall of kings. The watchers saw in the sky not only comfort, but warning, a mirror of the precariousness of human life. And yet, through collapse after collapse, humanity never abandoned the heavens. Even when cities fell silent, the stars remained. A child could look upward from the ruins and see the same constellations their ancestors had named. The continuity was unbroken. Where floods erased land, where broken ages silenced cultures, the sky still spoke. The watchers may have changed, the temples may have crumbled, but the dialogue endured. The legacy of these cosmic watchers lingers today. We still build observatories, though of glass and steel rather than stone. We still name constellations after gods, though their stories are half forgotten. We still launch our gaze beyond the atmosphere, seeking meaning in the endless. And when we look upon monuments like Stonehenge or the pyramids, we see not only stones aligned to solstices, but the yearning of humanity itself, the longing to inscribe eternity into the fragile span of human life. Yet the watchers remind us of something more profound, that to look upward is to look inward. The stars reflect not only cosmic order, but human desire, our need to believe in meaning greater than ourselves. Whether gods, omens, or distant suns, they embody the mystery of existence, the question of our place in time. The sky has always been our mirror, showing us both our fragility and our possibility. As we trace the legacy of the cosmic watchers, we stand again at the threshold of awe. For beyond the myths of the stars lies another layer of mystery, the creatures that once walked the earth beside us, giants now vanished but never forgotten. Just as the stars gave rise to gods, so too did the memory of great beasts give rise to monsters and legends. From the heavens we now turn back to the earth, to the vanishing giants whose shadows still haunt our imagination. Long before myths of dragons, titans, and monsters haunted our stories, there were creatures whose very existence seemed larger than life. The plains of the Ice Age were crowded not only with humans, but with giants. Mammoths, whose tusks curved like ivory crescents, woolly rhinoceroses cloaked in thick hair, cave bears towering in their dens, saber-toothed cats whose fangs glimmered like knives. To our ancestors, these were not mythical beasts, but daily reality, presences felt in the hunt, the chase, and the fear of night. They were companions in survival, rivals for land, threats, and prizes. And then, within a geological instant, they were gone. The extinction of megafauna marks one of the greatest mysteries of prehistory. Across continents, between 50,000 and 10,000 years ago, species that had endured for millions of years vanished. In North America, mastodons and giant ground sloths disappeared, leaving only scattered bones and the faint outline of tusks in the soil. In Eurasia, mammoths dwindled until only a few isolated herds survived on islands before finally dying out. In Australia, marsupial lions, giant kangaroos, and enormous wombats known as diprotodons fell silent. What caused this sudden fading? Climate change, the end of the Ice Age, the loss of grasslands, all played their part. But one factor recurs in every land where extinction spread: the arrival of Homo sapiens. Humanity had always hunted, but to encounter such giants was to face challenges far beyond ordinary prey. To bring down a mammoth or a giant sloth required coordination, persistence, and strategy. Yet once mastered, the rewards were immense. A single kill fed a tribe for weeks, supplied hides for clothing and shelter, and bones for tools. Some scientists argue that the scale of hunting itself tipped the balance, that these giants, already stressed by warming climates, could not withstand the relentless pressure of human ingenuity. Others insist the story is more complex, that ecosystems shifted too rapidly, grasslands giving way to forests, leaving the great herbivores starved. Whatever the cause, the result was the same: silence. But silence in the land does not mean silence in memory. The megafauna once gone lived on in story. The mammoth became the thunder beast of legends, its bones mistaken for those of giants. The saber-tooth and cave lion returned as lions of myth, creatures larger and more terrible than those alive today. Across cultures, dragons rose, scaled, winged, fire-breathing, yet often with the bones of real animals buried beneath the tail. In the high plains of Central Asia, tribes stumbled upon fossilized skulls of protoceratops, their beaked jaws inspiring the first legends of griffins. In Europe, mammoth bones eroding from riverbanks were believed to be the remains of heroes or monsters from a forgotten age. The giants were gone, but their shadows walked beside humanity still. To imagine the encounter with these beasts is to understand the roots of awe. A hunter, standing beneath the silhouette of a mammoth against the horizon, must have felt both terror and reverence. To approach a cave and find the paw marks of a bear that could rise taller than any man was to be reminded of one's fragility. These moments imprinted themselves not only on survival, but on imagination. Cave paintings at Chauvet and Altamira teem with animals: aurochs, bison, mammoths, lions. Some are drawn with startling accuracy, others with symbolic exaggeration, their size magnified, their power heightened. the artists painted what they feared and revered, creating a record not just of what was hunted, but of what was worshipped. The disappearance of megafauna changed humanity. Without mammoths, mammoth hunting bands had to adapt, turning more deeply to smaller game, to fishing, to farming. The abundance once granted by giants was gone, and in their absence, societies shifted. Yet even as the world grew quieter, myths grew louder. The memory of giants passed from experience into story, each retelling transforming flesh into symbol. The dragon that slumbers beneath mountains, the leviathan that churns the sea, the giant that stalks the wilderness. These may all be echoes of real creatures, transmuted by memory into myth. Some remnants lingered long enough to blur myth and reality. On Wrangel Island in the Arctic, a population of woolly mammoths survived until just 4,000 years ago. Their last, steps taken while the pyramids of Egypt were already rising. Imagine the stories if sailors or hunters glimpsed them across icy plains, mistaking them for beings out of time. Could the myths of monstrous beasts in remote lands be born from such fleeting survivals? Similarly, giant moa birds still walked New Zealand when Polynesian settlers arrived, their vast forms inspiring both reverence and relentless hunting until they too fell silent. The vanishing giants remind us of humanity's power, but also its shadow. To live alongside such creatures was to live in humility, reminded daily of forces greater than oneself. To lose them was to lose not only food and resource, but also a mirror in which humanity saw its own place in the chain of life. Some argue that our myths of gods and monsters, of titans and dragons, arose in the vacuum left by extinction, as if the mind sought to fill with story the space once filled by towering presence. And yet, their bones still speak. In Siberia, mammoth tusks rise from thawing permafrost, ivory curved like the moon's crescent. In South America, caves yield the skeletons of giant sloths, claws as long as daggers. In tar pits, saber-toothed cats lie entombed in asphalt, jaws agape as though still hunting. To stand before these fossils is to stand before memory made tangible, to see the shape of creatures that once walked beside us. They are relics of a vanished age, but they are also storytellers, whispering that we shared the earth with giants, and that their disappearance is part of our own story. What would humanity be if the giants had survived? Would we still imagine dragons if mammoths still roamed the tundra? Would we tell tales of monsters if saber-toothed cats still prowled the forests? Or did their extinction create the very space in which myth could grow? These questions linger, unanswered, for the giants are gone, leaving only their absence and the shadows they cast across imagination. The vanishing giants remind us that memory itself is fragile, that the boundary between history and myth is porous. They teach us that extinction is not only an ecological event, but a cultural one, reshaping imagination, belief, and story. And in their silence, they remind us of our own impermanence, that humanity too walks a fragile path upon an earth that remembers all its children, but does not preserve them all. From the bones of vanished beasts, we turn once more to the earth itself, to the deeper forces that shaped not only their fate, but ours. For beneath the soil lie scars of impacts, shifts of stone, reversals of magnetism, enigmas of deep time that hint at catastrophes far greater than the loss of giants. If the vanishing beasts remind us of what has been lost, the echoes of the deep earth remind us of how fragile the stage itself has always been. Chapter 8. Complete, 1,200 words. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 9, Echoes of the Deep Earth, 1,200 words? Here is Chapter 9, 1,200 words. following naturally from the vanishing giants into the deeper forces of the earth. Catastrophes and enigmas that shaped not just life, but time itself. Chapter 9. Echoes of the Deep Earth. 1,200 words. Beneath our feet lies a story older than myth, older even than humanity itself. The earth is not still. It never has been. It groans, it shifts, it burns. Mountains rise and crumble. Seas advance and retreat. Continents drift like rafts upon molten depths. For our ancestors, the ground may have seemed eternal, the solid anchor against which all else moved. Yet the deep earth has always held its own mysteries, its own hidden power. Every tremor, every volcanic plume, every scar upon stone is a reminder that the earth itself is alive, shaping and reshaping the fragile surface upon which we live. The first humans to feel the ground shake beneath them must have believed the world was being torn apart. Imagine standing in a village of mud brick and thatch when the earth convulses, walls tumbling, fields splitting, rivers shifting course. To the people who endured it, such events could not be random. They were the anger of gods, the movement of titans, or the breathing of a living world. Volcanic eruptions were worse still. When Mount Toba erupted nearly 74,000 years ago, the sky itself darkened. Ash rained across continents, blotting out the sun, cooling the globe, and reducing humanity to a bottleneck of survivors. Some scientists argue that this single event nearly extinguished us, cutting our population to mere thousands. If so, then every one of us alive today carries the memory of survival through that catastrophe, buried not in words, but in blood. The scars of such cataclysms lie everywhere. Impact craters, like Chicxulub in Mexico, recall the asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs, altering the course of evolution itself. Though that event occurred long before humanity, its echo shaped the world we inherited. Lesser impacts, too, may have scarred human memory. Fiery streaks across the sky, explosions that rattled the land, floods of molten stone that devoured forests. Some suggest the Younger Dryas, that abrupt return to ice 12,800 years ago, was triggered by a comet striking the Earth. Whether true or not, the sudden cooling, the floods, and the chaos it brought would have been remembered as divine punishment, the hand of heaven striking the Earth. The deep Earth also leaves riddles of time. Magnetic reversals, when the poles shift and compasses would point south instead of north, are written into stone. These reversals occur every few 100,000 years, their effects on life still uncertain. Imagine the awe of ancient peoples if such a shift occurred within memory, the sky itself changing, auroras dancing across latitudes never seen before. To them, it would have been a sign, a cosmic upheaval mirrored in the trembling of the ground. Volcanoes left their own myths. Mount Vesuvius preserved Pompeii in ash, but earlier eruptions must have inspired even greater terror. In the Pacific, islands were born in fire, each new cone explained by stories of angry gods or fallen stars. In Indonesia, Krakatoa's eruption in 1883 darkened skies across the globe. Imagine similar events in prehistory, when no record could be kept except story. To those who lived through it, the world itself seemed to end, and to retell it was to pass on a memory of apocalypse. Earthquakes, floods, and eruptions were not the only enigmas. There were places where the land itself seemed haunted. Geysers spouting steam, fumaroles whispering smoke, lakes that boiled with unseen forces. In such places, myth flourished. Spirits were said to dwell within mountains, gods beneath the sea, monsters in caverns. These beliefs were not folly, but interpretation. the only way to explain a world that shook and burned without warning. When the ground split, people believed a god was angry. When new land rose from the ocean, they believed a deity had given birth. The echoes of the deep earth were translated into human story, their mystery clothed in myth. Yet science, too, finds wonder here. Tectonic plates grind against each other with slow inevitability, carrying continents thousands of miles across aeons. Once, Africa and South America were one, their separation marked today by matching fossils on opposite shores. Once, Antarctica was green, its mountains crowned with forests. The deep earth is a clock not of centuries, but of millions of years, ticking in rhythms beyond human comprehension. To glimpse that scale is to feel the smallness of our own civilizations, to realize that every city, every monument, every myth stands upon a stage that shifts without regard for us, and still, the echoes of the deep earth speak in whispers we cannot fully decipher. Why do civilizations sometimes fall after great eruptions? Did shifts in climate and soil doom entire peoples? Was the silence of the broken ages tied not only to human frailty, but to forces far beneath their feet? Archaeologists uncover layers of ash above abandoned villages, skeletons beneath mudslides, sudden droughts written in tree rings. Again and again, human fate intertwines with Earth's own restlessness. Some suggest the ancients knew more than we credit. Megalithic sites aligned not only to stars, but to geological features, springs, fissures, magnetic anomalies. Did they sense subtle forces of the earth, vibrations we have forgotten? Legends speak of earth dragons, of lines of power crossing the land, myths perhaps rooted in real perception of the planet's hidden energies. To dismiss them as fantasy is easy. To wonder if they reflect a knowledge lost is harder. The echoes of the deep earth remind us that our species is not the master of this planet, but its guest. The soil preserves our bones, but it also swallows our cities. Volcanoes bury, earthquakes topple, floods erase. And yet, from each catastrophe, humanity endures, carrying forward stories that transform disaster into myth. To stand before a scarred crater or a wall of volcanic stone is to stand before memory deeper than history, memory that predates even language. And so, we arrive at a haunting realization. The earth has reset itself before, and it may do so again. Extinctions, reversals, impacts. These are not rare aberrations, but recurring notes in the planet's long song. We live in a moment of calm between upheavals, a pause in the great rhythm of fire and ice. To recognize this is not to surrender to fear, but to acknowledge our place in a story much larger than ourselves. The echoes of the deep earth are the stage upon which humanity walks. They remind us that we are fragile, but also that we are resilient, carrying memory through collapse after collapse. Yet even as the earth groans beneath us, another silence grows louder. The silence of time itself, the knowledge that our own civilizations will one day be dust, their ruins buried, their stories half remembered. From the deep earth, we turn to the deep future, to the silence of what will remain when we too have joined the forgotten. There will come a time when our cities, bright and loud with machines, fall silent. Skyscrapers that scrape the sky will one day lean and crumble. Highways will crack and buckle beneath encroaching roots. Steel will rust, glass will shatter, and what once glittered with light will dissolve back into the patience of soil. To imagine the silence of the future past is to step outside of human time and into the vastness of the earth's rhythm, where centuries are seconds and civilizations are no more than sparks in the dark. The ruins we leave behind will not be monuments to permanence, but offerings to the same dust that swallowed Çatalhöyük Mohenjo-Daro, and all the forgotten cities before us. Archaeologists of the far future, whether human or something other, may uncover our world as we have uncovered theirs. They may find towers submerged beneath rising seas, tunnels sealed with silt, plastic fragments pressed into stone like fossils of an age that mistook its waste for immortality. They may piece together the remnants of our languages, puzzled by the fragments, just as we now puzzle over undeciphered scripts. And they may wonder, as we wonder of those before us, who were these people? What gods did they worship? What dreams did they chase? And why did they vanish? The silence of the future past begins not in collapse alone, but in forgetting. Even now, traditions fade, languages disappear, stories once sung are stilled. Entire cultures dissolve within a generation, their memory kept alive only by a handful of songs or artifacts. If this happens in a single lifetime, what of centuries? What of millennia? When we gaze upon the ruins of vanished worlds, we are not only looking backward, but forward, glimpsing the mirror in which our own reflection will one day fade. Yet silence is not emptiness. It is a kind of memory, carried not in words, but in traces. The earth remembers us in ways we cannot imagine. Layers of sediment will hold the shadow of our age, from the radioactive isotopes of our weapons to the carbon scars of our burning. The very bones of our species will be layered into future rock, just as we now find ammonites spiraled in limestone, or trilobites pressed into shale. Our memory will not vanish entirely. It will simply transform, receding from story into geology, from culture into strata. What remains most haunting is the thought that all we believe eternal may be ephemeral, and all we dismiss as trivial may endure. The marble statue may erode, but the shard of plastic may persist for tens of thousands of years. A poem may be lost, but the imprint of a boot on the moon may remain untouched. The record we leave behind will be accidental, partial, strange. Future eyes will see us not as we see ourselves, but as a riddle of fragments. And yet, silence is not defeat. For just as the dust buried the cities of the past, but could not erase their mystery, so too will our silence preserve a kind of awe. To those who come after, we will not be merely a vanished species. We will be a question. Our ruins will spark imagination as Göbekli Tepe sparks ours, as the pyramids or Stonehenge stir our wonder. We will become myth to others, remembered not only for what we built, but for what we lost. In that sense, silence is not erasure, but transformation. It is tempting to believe we are different, that technology shields us from the fate of vanished worlds. Yet history whispers otherwise. The Indus Valley thought itself secure. Rome believed its walls eternal. All believed they were the pinnacle, and all fell. To recognize our own fragility is to embrace humility, to remember that we are not immune to the same cycles that silenced the giants, the same earth that swallows cities. The silence of the future past waits for us too, and in it lies both warning and possibility. For perhaps silence is not the end, but the beginning of something else. Every collapse clears the ground for renewal. Every forgotten city allows space for another to rise. The dust that buries also preserves, holding in its quiet grip the seeds of memory. The question is not whether we will be forgotten, it is what kind of silence we will leave. Will it be a silence of devastation, of waste and ruin? Or will it be a silence of mystery, one that stirs wonder in those who come after? In the end, perhaps what matters is not permanence but continuity. Stories carried forward, memories preserved not in stone but in imagination. When we tell of floods, of giants, of gods in the sky, we are not only recalling the past, but ensuring that the silence of those who came before us is not absolute. We become their voice, their continuation. So too, perhaps, will those who follow us carry fragments of our story, reshaped into myths we cannot predict. The silence of the future. Past will not be absolute. It will echo, as all silence does, and in that echo lies hope. For silence is never final. The earth holds memory in stone, the stars in their endless light, the seas in their depths. What we lose in words, we may preserve in myth. What we bury in soil, we may discover again. Our story is fragile, yes, but it is also enduring, passed like fire from one age to the next. Even if our cities fall, the essence of our humanity, the urge to dream, to wonder, to create, may outlast us, written not in monuments, but in the fabric of imagination itself. To stand at the edge of time is to realize that we are part of a vast cycle, a rhythm of building and breaking, remembering and forgetting. The silence of the future past is not a void to be feared, but a reminder to live fully in the present, to leave behind not only ruins, but meaning. One day, when our voices are gone, when our cities are dust, the earth will still turn, the stars will still burn, and the silence will still speak. And perhaps, in that silence, someone, or something, will pause, uncover a fragment of who we were, and feel the same awe we feel when we stand before the ruins of the ancients. In that moment, across the gulf of time, we will live again, not as flesh, but as mystery. The silence of the future past will not be the end of us. It will be the beginning of another story, waiting to be told.